They say there are 3 sounds a woman never forgets: her mother's lullaby, her first child's cry, and the words that destroy her life. I heard mine at the altar. I cannot marry you. But what they don't tell you, what the gossips and the scandalmongers always leave out, is what comes after the destruction. The cold clarity that rises from the ashes of humiliation. The rage that tastes like copper on your tongue. The moment you realize that revenge isn't a dish best served cold. It's a vow spoken in a cathedral, witnessed by 300 of London's finest, binding you forever to the one man in England more dangerous than the one who broke your heart. My name is Clara Vane. This is the story of how my sister stole my husband on our wedding day, and how I stole something far more valuable in return. I should have known something was wrong when Isolde insisted on helping me dress. My sister had never been the type to attend to others. She was the rose, I was the gardener. She was the diamond, I was the setting. Our entire lives had been orchestrated around a single truth. Isolde was the beautiful one, and I was the sensible one. But that morning she sat on my bed in her blue silk dressing gown, the one that made her eyes look like Arctic ice, and watched as my lady's maid laced my corset. Watched as they lowered the wedding dress over my head, all that Brussels lace and seed pearls cascading down like a waterfall of ivory dreams. "You look beautiful, Clara," she said, and I heard something in her voice I couldn't quite place. Something that should have warned me. But I was too happy, too excited, too stupidly, blindly convinced that today, finally, I would be the special one, the chosen one, the beloved bride of Edward Vane, Duke of Ravenswood. I smiled at my reflection in the mirror, at the girl who believed in fairy tales and happy endings and the sanctity of sisterly love. That girl would be dead within the hour. "Thank you, Isolde," I said, reaching back to squeeze her hand. "I'm so glad you're here with me." She squeezed back, her fingers cold despite the summer warmth. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," she whispered. And then she smiled. If I'd been paying attention, if I'd been anything other than a lovesick fool in a wedding dress, I would have recognized that smile. The same smile she'd given me when she'd stole my favorite doll when we were 6. The same smile she'd given me when she'd convinced Lord Pemberton to take her to the opera instead of me when we were 17. The same smile she'd perfected over 23 years of taking everything I'd ever wanted and making it hers. But I didn't see it. Not then. I saw it later, at the altar, when it was far too late to do anything but watch my life crumble to dust. Now let the real story begin. The scent of white roses had turned sickly sweet in the summer heat. I stood at the altar of St. Clement's Cathedral, my hands trembling beneath the cascade of Brussels lace that had taken 6 seamstresses 3 months to complete. The afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, painting the ancient stones in jeweled colors, sapphire, ruby, emerald, as if God himself were celebrating my marriage to Edward Vane, Duke of Ravenswood. But Edward wasn't looking at me. His eyes, those cornflower blue eyes I'd gazed into 1,000 times, dreaming of this very moment, were fixed on someone behind me. Someone in the front pew. My chest constricted beneath the pearl-encrusted bodice my mother had commissioned from Paris. "Edward." My voice barely rose above a whisper, yet in the cathedral's vast silence, it echoed like a gunshot. The Archbishop cleared his throat, his Book of Common Prayer trembling slightly in his aged hands. He'd married 3 generations of my family. He knew something was terribly, devastatingly wrong. Edward's jaw tightened. For a fleeting moment, I saw something in his expression. Was it guilt? Pity? No. It was worse than that. It was relief. The relief of a man about to unburden himself of an unwanted obligation. "I cannot do this," he said, his voice steady, rehearsed. "Forgive me, Lady Clara, but I cannot marry you." The words didn't feel real. They hung in the perfumed air like the incense the altar boys had swung earlier, thick and choking. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. Heard the rustling of silk as 300 guests shifted in their pews, suddenly ravenous for scandal. I don't understand. My fingers clutched my bouquet, more white roses, their thorns pressing through my gloves, as if holding on to them could somehow anchor me to the reality I'd known just moments before. Edward stepped back, creating distance between us that felt wider than oceans. I cannot marry you, he repeated louder now for the audience that would devour this story for years to come, because my heart belongs to another. And then he turned. He turned away from me, away from the Archbishop, away from his duty and his honor and every promise he'd ever made. He walked down the 3 marble steps of the altar with the confidence of a man who'd already won, who'd already claimed his prize. He walked straight to my sister, Isolde. She sat in the front pew in a gown of ice blue silk that matched her eyes identical to mine, yet somehow always more luminous, more captivating. Her golden hair was arranged in perfect ringlets. Her lips curved into the smallest, most triumphant smile I'd ever seen. Edward extended his hand to her. And Isolde, my beloved sister, my only sister, took it. Time fractured into crystalline shards. I watched, trapped in my own body, a prisoner in lace and pearls, as Edward drew Isolde to her feet. She rose like Venus from the foam, graceful and inevitable. The blue silk of her gown whispered against the stone floor as she stepped into the aisle. Into my place. Into my life. Forgive us, Clara, Isolde said, her voice carrying that particular musical quality that had charmed every drawing room in London. But there was something else beneath the honey, something sharp and glittering and cold. We tried to resist. Truly we did. But love cannot be denied. Love. The word was a knife between my ribs. You knew, I breathed, the realization crashing over me like a winter wave. You knew and you came anyway. You sat there and watched me dress. You helped me with my veil. You told me I looked beautiful. Isolde's eyes met mine, and in them I saw no remorse. Only satisfaction. Only victory. You did look beautiful, she said softly, intimately, as if we were alone in our shared bedroom and not standing in a cathedral before the entire aristocracy of England. You looked like a duchess. But Edward doesn't need a duchess. He needs a wife he can love. The implication hung between us, poisonous and clear. He could never love you. My mother had risen from her seat, her face pale as the altar cloth. My father remained seated, his hands gripping the pew in front of him, knuckles white. He looked like a man who'd aged a decade in mere moments. The guests were no longer silent. Whispers rose like a murder of crows taking flight, harsh, ugly, feeding on carrion. Jilted at the altar, always knew Isolde was the prettier. Poor Lady Clara, what humiliation. Will she ever recover from this? Edward wrapped his arm around Isolde's waist with the possessive certainty of ownership. We'll leave for the continent tonight, he announced, addressing the crowd as if he were still the master of ceremonies at his own wedding. When we return, I hope you'll welcome us as man and wife. Man and wife. The title that should have been mine. I stood frozen at the altar, a statue carved from shame and shock, as they began to walk down the aisle together. Isolde's train, shorter than mine, simpler than mine, swept the floor where rose petals had been scattered for my procession. As they passed, Isolde glanced back, and she smiled. Not the soft, sympathetic smile of a sister who'd caused pain despite her best intentions. No. This was the smile of a hunter who'd run her prey to ground. The smile of a woman who'd taken what she wanted and would savor the victory for years to come. That smile broke something in me. Something that had been fracturing with each word, each glance, each impossible moment of this waking nightmare. It shattered completely, and in its place something else emerged. Something cold. Something clear. Something sharp as the thorns pressing through my gloves. Rage. My eyes swept the cathedral, no longer seeing the pitying faces or the scandalized whispers. I was searching for something else. Someone else. The rumors about Edward's older half-brother had circulated through London's ballrooms for years like ghost stories told to frightened debutantes. Lord Alaric Vane, born of the old Duke's first, secret marriage to a French actress. Legitimized only on his father's deathbed, inheriting wealth but not the title. A man who'd spent his youth on the continent, studying in dark libraries and darker places. They said he practiced mesmerism. That he'd killed a man in a duel in Vienna. That his eyes could freeze your blood. That he'd refused 3 marriage proposals from earls' daughters, each more beautiful than the last, without explanation. They said he was dangerous. They said he never smiled. They said he was a devil in gentleman's clothing. I found him in the shadows of the north transept, where the stained glass windows cast no colored light. He stood perfectly still, dressed in black from head to toe, black coat, black waistcoat, black cravat tied with mathematical precision. While Edward was all golden warmth and easy charm, Alaric was winter personified. He was watching the spectacle with an expression of detached interest, as if observing a mildly entertaining play. His face was angular where Edward's was soft, sharp where Edward's was gentle. A thin scar traced his left cheekbone, a souvenir from some mysterious past adventure. Our eyes met across the nave. Where Edward's eyes had been warm blue summer skies, Alaric's were the gray of storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Deep set beneath dark brows, they assessed me with an intelligence that felt almost invasive, as if he could read every thought racing through my mind. I should have looked away. Every rule of propriety demanded it. Instead, I gathered my skirts in both hands, rose petals and lace in broken dreams, and walked down the altar steps. My legs somehow remembered how to move even though my heart was still shattering in my chest. The crowd's whispers crescendoed into shocked gasps. "Lady Clara, wait," the Archbishop called out, but I didn't stop. I walked down the aisle, my wedding train dragging behind me like a banner of war. Past my mother, whose face had gone from pale to crimson. Past my father, who'd finally found his feet but seemed unable to form words. Past the Duke of Westmere and the Countess of Vane and every other member of the ton who would dine on this scandal for months. I walked straight to the devil in the shadows. Lord Alaric didn't move as I approached. Didn't bow. Didn't offer any of the courtesies a gentleman should extend to a lady in distress. He simply watched me with those storm-gray eyes, waiting. When I stood before him, close enough that I could see the fine embroidery on his waistcoat, close enough to catch the scent of sandalwood and something darker, smoky and foreign, I lifted my chin. "Lord Alaric," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos roaring through my veins. "I have a proposition for you." One dark eyebrow arched. "Do you?" Not a question. A statement of mild curiosity. "Marry me," I said. "Right now. Today." The silence that followed my words was absolute. Even the whispers died, strangled by the sheer audacity of what I'd just said. Somewhere behind me, my mother made a sound like a wounded animal. I didn't turn. Couldn't turn. My eyes were locked with Alaric's, and I suddenly understood what the debutantes meant when they said his gaze could freeze blood. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, looking into a darkness so complete I couldn't see the bottom. "An interesting proposition," Alaric said finally, his voice low and cultured, touched with the faintest trace of a French accent from his years abroad. "Though one might question your timing, Lady Clara." "The timing is perfect," I countered, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "The cathedral is full. The Archbishop is present. The wedding breakfast is prepared. The only thing lacking is a groom, and I'm looking at one. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Amusement? Interest? It was impossible to tell. I'm not Edward, he said softly. I know exactly who you are. I took a step closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. He was taller than Edward by several inches, broader in the shoulders despite his lean frame. You're his older brother. You have your own fortune, some say larger than the duchy's. You have no title yet, but you have something more valuable. And what is that? Power, I whispered. The kind that doesn't come from a coronet. You don't need society's approval. You never have. Which means... I paused, gathering every ounce of courage I possessed. Which means you won't be destroyed by what just happened here today. But I will be. Unless I transform this humiliation into something else. Unless I prove to everyone watching that I wasn't rejected. I simply chose a better match. Alaric's lips curved, but it wasn't quite a smile. It was something more predatory. More knowing. You want to use me, he said. To salvage your reputation. Yes. You're honest? That's refreshing. He tilted his head, studying me as if I were an equation he was trying to solve. But what do I gain from this arrangement? I'd anticipated this question during my long walk down the aisle. I'd had mere moments to construct an argument, but desperation had sharpened my mind to a razor's edge. Legitimacy, I said. You may have your father's name and wealth, but society still treats you like an interloper. The whispers follow you everywhere. The actress's son, the continental mystery, the dangerous half-brother. But marry me, marry a duke's jilted bride in front of 300 witnesses, and you become something else. What? A hero, I said. A gentleman who rescued a lady in distress. A man of honor who stepped in when his brother proved himself dishonorable. Society loves nothing more than a romantic gesture, Lord Alaric. Give them one, and they'll open every door that's ever been closed to you. He was silent for a long moment, and I felt the weight of every eye in the cathedral pressing against my back. My mother would be in hysterics by now. My father would be calculating the damage to our family name. And somewhere, probably already in a carriage bound for Dover, Edward and Isolde would be laughing at my pain. That thought steadied me. There would be conditions, Alaric said finally. Name them. This would be a marriage of convenience only. I have no interest in. He paused, choosing his words with care. In romance. In love. In any of the sentiments your sister and my brother claim to have discovered. Each word was a small cut, but I'd already bled so much today that I barely felt them. Agreed, I said. We would maintain separate households where practical. Separate lives where possible. Agreed. And you would ask nothing of me except my name and my protection. I hesitated, then nodded. Agreed. Alaric looked past me then, his gaze sweeping the crowd. I saw the moment his decision crystallized, saw it in the slight straightening of his shoulders, the minute adjustment of his cravat. Very well, Lady Clara, he said, his voice carrying across the cathedral with perfect clarity. I accept your proposal. The crowd erupted. The ceremony was a blur of cold precision. The Archbishop, flustered but unable to refuse a direct request from Lord Alaric Vane, a man whose donations kept the cathedral's roof in repair, reopened his prayer book with shaking hands. My parents remained frozen in their pew, caught between horror and a desperate hope that I'd somehow salvaged the unsalvageable. Alaric and I stood at the same altar where I'd been rejected mere minutes before. The white roses still filled the air with their oppressive sweetness. The light still streamed through the stained glass in jeweled patterns. But everything had changed. Do you, Alaric James Vane, take this woman? I didn't hear most of the words. My mind was still racing, still processing what I'd done. I'd married a stranger. A dangerous stranger. A man who'd agreed to my proposal not out of kindness or attraction, but out of cold calculation. I'd traded one cage for another. "I do," Alaric said, his voice steady as stone. The Archbishop turned to me and I saw pity in his rheumy eyes. He'd baptized me as an infant, confirmed me at 13. He'd expected to see me married with joy, not this transaction wrapped in holy words. "Do you, Clara Elizabeth Thornton, take this man?" "I do," I whispered. Alaric slid a ring onto my finger, not the sapphire surrounded by diamonds that Edward had commissioned, but a simple gold band that he must have been wearing himself. It was too large, sliding easily over my knuckle, and I had to curl my finger to keep it from falling off. A perfect metaphor for this entire disaster. "I now pronounce you man and wife." No kiss. Alaric didn't even attempt it. He simply offered me his arm, and I took it, feeling the hard muscle beneath the fine wool of his coat. Together, we walked down the aisle as Mr. and Mrs. Vane, or rather, Lord Alaric and Lady Clara Vane. The crowd parted before us like the Red Sea before Moses. Some faces showed shock. Others showed disgust. A few showed grudging admiration. I kept my eyes forward, my spine straight, channeling every deportment lesson my governess had drilled into me. A lady never shows weakness. A lady never falters. A lady holds her head high, no matter the circumstances. "Well, Miss Pemberton," I thought grimly, "I hope you're watching from wherever governesses go when they retire. I'm holding my head so high it might snap off." Alaric's carriage waited outside, black lacquer trimmed in silver, pulled by 4 midnight black horses. Even his carriage was dramatic, I thought, with a touch of hysteria. The footman opened the door, and Alaric handed me inside without ceremony. The interior was all dark leather and polished wood, smelling of tobacco and old books. I settled onto the seat, my wedding dress taking up nearly the entire space, layers of lace and silk crushing against the walls. Alaric climbed in after me and rapped once on the ceiling. The carriage lurched forward. And then we were moving, pulling away from St. Clement's Cathedral, away from my old life, away from everything I'd known and expected and dreamed of. I watched through the window as the familiar streets of London rolled past, the same streets I'd driven down this morning as Lady Clara Thornton, anxious bride-to-be. I was someone else now. Lady Clara Vane, wife of the devil in gentleman's clothing. Alaric sat across from me in the carriage, his long legs angled to avoid crushing my dress. He'd removed his gloves and was studying his hands with apparent interest, as if he'd never seen them before. I wanted to say something. Thank you, perhaps. Or ask what happens next. Or demand to know what kind of man agrees to marry a woman he doesn't know, doesn't love, doesn't even seem particularly interested in. But the words stuck in my throat. Because now that the adrenaline was fading, now that the immediate crisis had passed, the full weight of what I'd done was settling over me like a burial shroud. I'd married Lord Alaric Vane. The dangerous one. The cold one. The one everyone whispered about in frightened tones. And I had no idea what he would do with me now that I was his. The silence in the carriage was absolute. No words. No glances. Just the sound of hooves on cobblestones and the creaking of the carriage springs and my own heart beating out a rhythm that sounded remarkably like a funeral march. The scent of white roses clung to my dress, sickly sweet. And I had never felt so alone. The estate emerged from the twilight like something from a Gothic novel. Ravenhall. Even the name sounded like a curse. We'd been traveling for 3 hours, leaving London's glittering streets for the wild countryside of Hampshire. The carriage wound through ancient forests where the trees grew so thick that barely any light penetrated their canopy. Then, suddenly, the woods parted and there it was. The house rose from the hillside like a sleeping dragon, all dark stone and sharp turrets, windows that gleamed like watchful eyes. Ivy climbed the walls in twisted patterns, and gargoyles perched on the corners of the roof, their mouths open in silent screams. A lake stretched before it, black as obsidian, reflecting the house in its still surface like a mirror into a darker world. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. "Welcome home, Lady Vane," Alaric said, the first words he'd spoken since we'd left the cathedral. Home. The word felt foreign on my tongue. This fortress of shadows and stone was supposed to be my home now. Not the sun-drenched estate in Kent where I'd grown up, with its rose gardens and white columns and rooms full of laughter. This place looked like it had never known laughter, like it would swallow the sound and turn it into echoes. The carriage stopped before the main entrance, where a regiment of servants stood in perfect formation. They were all dressed in black. Even the maids wore black instead of the traditional gray. Of course they did. Everything about Alaric Vane seemed designed to unsettle. A butler stepped forward as Alaric helped me from the carriage. He was an older man with silver hair and the posture of a military officer. "Welcome, my lord." "My lady." His eyes swept over my wedding dress, now creased and travel-stained, with professional impassivity. "We've prepared the east wing as requested." "Thank you, Morrison." Alaric's hand was still on my elbow, guiding me toward the entrance. "Have dinner sent to Lady Vane's chambers. She'll want to rest." "My chambers. Separate chambers." "Of course." The interior of Ravenhall was just as dramatic as its exterior. The entrance hall soared 3 stories high, its walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. A grand staircase swept upward, splitting into 2 wings like the arms of a dark angel. Candelabras cast flickering shadows that danced across marble floors so polished I could see my reflection, a ghost in white lace lost in a house of shadows. "The east wing is yours entirely," Alaric said as we climbed the stairs, my train whispering against each step. "I occupy the west wing. You'll find everything you need has been arranged. If you require anything else, ring for Mrs. Croft. She's the housekeeper." Everything in his tone was business. Transaction. As if he were showing a guest to their room at an inn, not bringing his bride home on their wedding night. We reached the top of the stairs, and he led me down a long corridor lined with more portraits and suits of armor that gleamed dully in the candlelight. Finally, he stopped before a set of double doors carved with intricate patterns, thorns and roses intertwined. "You're sweet," he said, pushing the doors open. I stepped inside and stopped, my breath catching. The rooms were beautiful. Dark, yes, all burgundy velvet and mahogany furniture, but beautiful. A fire crackled in an enormous fireplace. The bed was a 4-poster draped in silk the color of deep wine. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, overlooking the black lake and the forests beyond. On a dressing table, someone had placed a vase of white roses. White roses. The same flowers from the wedding. The same scent that would forever remind me of Edward's rejection and Isolde's smile. My hands clenched into fists. "I'll have them removed," Alaric said quietly. He'd seen my reaction. Of course he had. Those storm-gray eyes seemed to see everything. "No," I said, my voice harder than I'd intended. "Leave them. I don't want to be the kind of woman who runs from reminders." Something flickered across his face, respect, perhaps? It vanished before I could be sure. "As you wish." He moved toward the door, clearly preparing to leave. To abandon me to this beautiful prison on what should have been my wedding night. "Lord Alaric," I said, and he paused, his hand on the door frame. "What happens now?" He turned, and in the firelight, his features looked even sharper, more angular. "More dangerous. Now you rest. Tomorrow we'll discuss the arrangements of our partnership." Partnership. Not marriage. Not union. Partnership. I see, I whispered. He studied me for a long moment and I wondered what he saw. A desperate woman in a ruined dress? A foolish girl who'd proposed to a stranger to save her pride? Someone ugly and undesirable, so undesirable that even on our wedding night he couldn't bear to touch me? "Good night, Lady Vane," he said finally. And then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him with a sound like a cell locking. I stood alone in the center of the beautiful, terrible room, still wearing my wedding dress, still smelling the sickly sweetness of white roses. And I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in the cathedral or the carriage, or any moment since Edward had spoken those devastating words. I cried. 3 days passed in strange isolation. I saw Alaric only at dinner, brief, formal affairs where we sat at opposite ends of an absurdly long table and made stilted conversation about the weather and the estate. Then he would excuse himself to his study, and I would retreat to my rooms, where I spent my time reading books from the manor's extensive library and staring out at the Black Lake. Mrs. Croft, the housekeeper, was kind in a distant way. She showed me the house, the portrait gallery, the conservatory, the music room with its massive pipe organ that looked like it belonged in a cathedral. But she never spoke of Alaric and I never asked. The servants moved through the halls like shadows, efficient and silent. They called me my lady, and curtsied when I passed, but I could feel their curiosity, their questions. Who is this woman their master married so suddenly? Why does she look so sad? Why does Lord Alaric never visit her chambers? On the morning of the 4th day, a letter arrived. Morrison brought it on a silver tray as I was taking breakfast in the morning room, the only room in the house that received direct sunlight, which made it slightly less oppressive than the others. "For you, my lady," he said, his face carefully neutral. "From London." My heart stopped. The handwriting on the envelope was achingly familiar. Feminine, elegant, with elaborate loops on the capital letters. Isolde's handwriting. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Morrison had discreetly withdrawn, leaving me alone with whatever poison my sister had decided to send. "Dearest Clara, I hope this letter finds you well in your new arrangement. I confess I'm still quite shocked by your impulsive decision to marry Lord Alaric. Though I suppose beggars cannot be choosers, can they? Edward and I have just returned from Paris. Oh, Clara, it was magnificent. The opera, the cafes, the way he looks at me as we stroll along the Seine. He says he's never known happiness like this. He says marrying me was like waking from a long, gray dream into brilliant sunlight. I do hope you're not too lonely at Ravenhall. I've heard such stories about that place, how dark it is, how isolated. And Lord Alaric, well, Edward says his brother has always been peculiar. Cold. They say he's never kept a mistress, never shown interest in any woman. One wonders if he's even capable of, well, you understand what I mean. But perhaps that suits you. You were always more interested in books than romance, weren't you? More comfortable in the library than the ballroom. Maybe a marriage of convenience is exactly what you deserve. We're planning to return to London soon. Edward has decided to host a ball at Ravenswood House. Naturally, you and Lord Alaric will be invited. I do hope you'll attend. I'm dying to see how you're managing in your new role. Your loving sister, Isolde. P.S. I'm wearing your sapphire necklace, the one grandmother left you. It matches my eyes so perfectly, and Edward insists I look like a queen in it. You don't mind, do you? After all, you have so many jewels now as Lord Alaric's wife. Surely you can spare one for your sister's happiness. The letter fluttered from my hands to the floor. She'd taken my necklace. The one piece of jewelry that had meant something to me, that had been specifically left to me in grandmother's will. And she'd done it knowing it would hurt me, knowing I would read about it and feel the violation like a fresh wound. more comfortable in the library than the ballroom. Maybe a marriage of convenience is exactly what you deserve. One wonders if he's even capable. The implications stung like wasps. Isolde was suggesting that Alaric found me so undesirable he couldn't even perform his husbandly duties. That I was so plain, so dull, so thoroughly unlovable that even a man who'd married me for practical reasons couldn't bring himself to touch me. And the worst part? The absolute worst part? She was right. 4 nights we'd been married, and Alaric hadn't so much as kissed my hand. He looked at me during dinner with polite disinterest, as if I were a moderately interesting piece of furniture. He disappeared into his wing of the house for hours at a time, doing God knows what, while I sat alone in mine. I pressed my palms against my eyes, refusing to cry again. I'd done enough crying. My lady? I looked up to find Mrs. Croft standing in the doorway, her expression concerned. Are you unwell? I'm fine, I lied, hastily composing myself. Just a letter from my sister. Something knowing flickered in the housekeeper's eyes. Family can be complicated. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. She moved into the room, her keys jangling at her belt. If I may be so bold, my lady, you shouldn't let anyone make you feel small. Not here. Not in this house. I looked at her in surprise. It was the most personal thing she'd said to me since I'd arrived. Lord Alaric, she continued carefully, is a good man. Different from most, certainly. Private. But good. Whatever that letter says, whatever anyone from your old life tries to tell you, you're the Lady of Ravenhall now. That means something. Before I could respond, she curtsied and left. I sat in the sunlight, holding Isolde's poisonous letter, and felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was time to stop hiding in my rooms. Maybe it was time to discover exactly who I'd married. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my enormous bed, listening to the wind howl around the manor's turrets, watching shadows dance across the ceiling. The house made sounds in the darkness, creaking and settling, as if it were a living thing breathing around me. Around midnight I heard it. Music. Faint but unmistakable. Piano music, drifting through the halls like a ghost's lament. I rose, wrapping a dressing gown over my nightdress, and followed the sound. It led me through the corridors of the east wing, past my suite, toward the central part of the house where our 2 wings connected. The music grew louder. Chopin, I realized. Nocturne in E-flat major. One of my favorites. It was coming from the music room. I stood outside the door, my hand raised to knock, but something stopped me. Instead, I eased the door open just enough to peer inside. Alaric sat at the grand piano, his back to me, his fingers moving across the keys with stunning grace. He'd removed his coat and cravat, his white shirt open at the collar. In the candlelight, with his dark hair slightly disheveled, he looked almost human. Not the cold, controlled man who'd sat across from me at dinner. Not the dangerous stranger who'd agreed to marry me out of calculation. Just a man playing music in the middle of the night and playing it beautifully. I must have made some sound, a gasp, a sigh, because his hands stilled on the keys. He turned, those storm-gray eyes finding me in the darkness. I'm sorry, I said quickly, suddenly aware of how inappropriate this was, me in my nightclothes, him in a state of partial undress, alone together in the middle of the night. I heard the music and You couldn't sleep, he finished. Not a question. No. He studied me for a moment, then gestured to the piano bench. Would you like to listen? I should have said no. Should have excused myself and returned to my rooms like a proper lady. But I was so desperately tired of being alone, of sitting in that beautiful cage he'd given me, wondering what kind of monster I'd married. I crossed the room and sat on the far end of the bench, leaving a careful distance between us. Alaric returned his hands to the keys and began to play again. The music filled the room, achingly beautiful, full of longing and sorrow and something else I couldn't quite name. "You play wonderfully," I said softly when he finished the piece. "My mother taught me." His fingers traced the keys without pressing them, as if remembering. Before she died, music was the one thing that made her happy in those final years. I'd forgotten about his mother, the French actress who'd scandalized society by secretly marrying a duke, who'd been hidden away like a shameful secret until her death. "I'm sorry," I said. "That must have been difficult." "No more difficult than being jilted at the altar, I imagine." The words were blunt, but his tone wasn't cruel. If anything, there was a thread of understanding in it. "At least your mother loved you," I said before I could stop myself. "My sister." I trailed off, thinking of Isolde's letter, still upstairs in my room like a coiled snake. "Your sister is a viper," Alaric said calmly. "Beautiful but poisonous. And your former fiancé is a fool who mistook venom for passion." I looked at him in surprise. "You barely know them." "I know enough. I watched Edward for years, the golden son beloved by all, convinced that his charm was a substitute for character. And your sister." He paused, his jaw tightening. "She sat in that pew watching you prepare to marry him, and she smiled. I saw her. She was enjoying it. Your pain was entertainment to her." The observation was so accurate, so perceptive, that I felt tears prick my eyes. "She sent me a letter," I whispered, "telling me about Paris, about how happy they are, about how Edward said marrying me would have been a long gray dream." Alaric's hand stilled on the keys. "She wrote that to you?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "And what did you write back?" "Nothing. I don't know what to say. She's right, isn't she? I'm not. I'm not the beautiful one. I'm not the one men dream about. I'm just—" "Stop." The command in his voice made me look up. His eyes were intense, burning with something I couldn't identify. "Don't," he said quietly, "ever compare yourself to her again. Do you understand me? But your sister is like a greenhouse flower, pretty but fragile, cultivated for show, incapable of surviving without constant admiration and attention. You." He paused and I held my breath. "You proposed to a stranger in front of 300 people to save yourself. You walked down that aisle with your head high while they all whispered. You've spent 4 days in a house everyone calls cursed without complaint. That takes a kind of strength your sister will never possess." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "You don't know me," I whispered. "How can you say that?" "I'm a very good judge of character, Clara. It's how I've survived." "Clara, not Lady Vane." My name, spoken in his low voice, sent shivers down my spine. I thought. I stopped, unsure how to continue. "You thought what?" "I thought you found me undesirable," I admitted, the words rushing out in a humiliating confession. "You haven't, we haven't, you stay in your wing and I stay in mine, and I thought it was because you couldn't bear to, Clara." He turned on the bench to face me fully, and suddenly the distance between us seemed very small. "I haven't touched you because I refused to take advantage of a woman who married me out of desperation. If anything happens between us, it will be because you want it. Not because you're trying to prove something to your sister or save your reputation or fulfill some obligation." "Oh," I breathed. We were very close now. Close enough that I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Close enough to catch his scent, sandalwood and something darker, more mysterious. "You're not undesirable," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Quite the opposite." My breath caught. "Alaric." He leaned forward, his hand coming up to cup my cheek, and I felt like I was falling. falling into those storm-gray eyes, falling into this moment, falling into something dangerous and exhilarating and completely unexpected. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone. His lips were inches from mine. I could feel the heat of him, the barely restrained tension in his body. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, "and I will." But I didn't want him to stop. Didn't want this moment to end. For the first time since the wedding, I felt like I could breathe. I leaned forward, closing the distance. Bang. A door slammed somewhere in the house, and we sprang apart like guilty children. My heart was racing, my skin flushed. Alaric stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "You should go back to your room," he said, but his voice was rough, unsteady. "It's late." "Yes," I managed, though I didn't move. Couldn't move. He looked at me one more time, and in his eyes I saw hunger and restraint warring with each other. "Good night, Clara." "Good night." I fled the music room, my nightdress whispering against the floor, my heart pounding like a drum. I didn't stop until I reached my suite and closed the door behind me, leaning against it, trying to catch my breath. My fingers touched my cheek where his hand had been, and I realized with startling clarity that I wanted my husband. My dangerous, mysterious, impossibly complicated husband. God help me. I couldn't face him at breakfast. The memory of what had almost happened in the music room, the way he'd looked at me, touched me, almost kissed me, made my skin feel too tight and my thoughts scatter like startled birds. "You're not undesirable." Quite the opposite. I pressed my fingers to my lips, remembering how close we'd been. How badly I'd wanted him to close that final distance. Mrs. Croft brought breakfast to my room with a knowing look that made me wonder if somehow the entire household was aware of my midnight wandering. "Lord Alaric asked me to inform you that he'll be in the village on business today," she said, setting the tray on my writing desk. "He won't return until evening." Relief and disappointment warred in my chest. "Thank you." After she left, I picked at the food without appetite, then decided I needed air. I couldn't spend another day trapped in these rooms, no matter how beautiful they were. The gardens at Ravenhall were as dramatic as the house itself, all twisting paths and overgrown hedges, wild roses climbing ancient stone walls. But unlike the manicured gardens of my childhood home, these felt alive, dangerous, beautiful in their chaos. I wandered deeper into the grounds, following a path that led away from the house toward what looked like an old folly. The structure was crumbling, covered in ivy, but still somehow elegant in its decay. That's when I heard it. A whimper. Soft paint. I followed the sound around the side of the folly and stopped. Alaric knelt in the grass, his fine coat discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up. In his arms, he cradled something small and dark. "Lord Alaric?" I said, surprised. "I thought you were in the village." He looked up, and for a moment I saw something vulnerable in his expression before his usual mask of control slid back into place. "Change of plans," he said curtly. Then more gently, "Come here." Carefully. I approached and saw what he was holding. A fox kit, its russet fur matted with blood. One of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle. "Oh," I breathed, kneeling beside him without thinking. "The poor thing." "Caught in a trap," Alaric said, his jaw tight with anger. "Some damn fool set snares on the estate boundaries. I've told them repeatedly." He stopped, visibly controlling himself. The fox kit whimpered again, its dark eyes wide with pain and fear. "Will it survive?" I asked. "If I can set the leg properly and prevent infection." His hands, so elegant on the piano keys last night, were now steady and sure as they examined the tiny creature. "But it will take time. And care." I watched, fascinated, as this man everyone called cold and dangerous worked with infinite patience to calm the frightened animal. He spoke to it in low French, words I couldn't quite catch, while his fingers gently probed the injury. "Can I help?" I asked. He glanced at me, surprised. "It's not pleasant work. I'm not as delicate as I look." Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his lips. "No. I'm beginning to realize that." For the next hour, we worked together in the shadow of the folly. Alaric showed me how to hold the kit still while he set the leg, how to prepare the poultice he'd learned to make from some herbalist in Vienna, how to wrap the tiny limb in strips torn from his own shirt. The fox bit him twice. He didn't even flinch. "There," he said finally, sitting back on his heels. "Now we wait and see if she's strong enough to heal." She. Yes, a female. Barely old enough to be away from her mother. His expression darkened. Which means the mother was probably caught in the trap as well. "What will you do with her?" "Keep her in the stable until she's healed. Then release her back to the forest." He looked down at the sleeping kid in his arms and his voice softened. "Everyone deserves a chance to survive, even when the world has been cruel." I had this sudden, startling realization that he wasn't talking about the fox. He stood, cradling the kit carefully. "I should get her settled. Are you walking back to the house?" "In a moment," I said, not ready to break the strange intimacy of what we just shared. Alaric nodded. "Clara," he said and paused. "Last night It's all right," I interrupted, not sure I could bear to hear him apologize for something I'd wanted so desperately. "We don't need to discuss it. Don't we?" I looked up at him, this complicated man with blood on his shirt and gentleness in his hands, and felt my heart do something dangerous. "I don't regret it," I said quietly. "If that's what you're worried about." His eyes locked with mine and the air between us felt charged, electric. "Neither do I," he said finally. Then he turned and walked toward the stables, leaving me alone in the garden with the scent of wild roses and the echo of words that changed everything. Dinner that night was different. Alaric had moved his place setting. Instead of sitting at the opposite end of the absurdly long table, he now sat adjacent to me, close enough that I could see the small cuts on his hands from the fox kit's teeth. "How is she?" I asked as the first course was served. "Sleeping. The stable master says she drank some water, which is a good sign." He paused. "I named her Isolde." I nearly choked on my wine. "You did what?" "I named the fox Isolde," he repeated, his expression perfectly serious. "She's beautiful, cunning, and has a vicious bite." It seemed appropriate. For a moment I just stared at him. Then, despite everything, despite the humiliation and the heartbreak and the poisonous letter still sitting upstairs in my room, I laughed. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, until my sides ached, until the footmen exchanged worried glances. That's terrible," I gasped between fits of laughter. "That's the most terrible thing I've ever heard." "Is it?" Alaric's lips curved into what was unmistakably a smile. "A real one. I thought it was rather clever. It's petty and vindictive and absolutely perfect." "Well," he said, raising his wine glass in a mock toast, "we can't all be paragons of forgiveness and grace." "No," I agreed, raising my own glass to meet his. "Sometimes we have to be petty and vindictive instead." Our glasses clinked and something passed between us. Understanding. Conspiracy. The beginning of something that felt almost like friendship. We ate in companionable silence for a while, and I marveled at how much had changed in just a few hours. This morning I'd been afraid to face him. Now I felt comfortable. As if the formal dinner table had become something else entirely. "Tell me about Vienna," I said suddenly. "Everyone says you studied there, but no one knows what you studied." "Everything," he said. "Philosophy, medicine, music, the occult sciences." "The occult sciences?" mesmerism, alchemy, things that exist in the space between science and superstition. He watched me carefully as if gauging my reaction. Does that frighten you? Should it? Most people think it makes me dangerous. I thought about how he'd cared for the fox, how his hands had been so gentle despite his strength. I think most people are idiots. He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound transformed his face completely. For a moment, I could see what he might have looked like as a young man, before the world had taught him to be careful. What about you? He asked. What did you study? The usual things. Piano, watercolors, how to pour tea and make polite conversation and pretend to be interested in weather patterns. But what did you actually care about? No one had ever asked me that before. In my family, in society, what I cared about had never mattered. Only what I could do to make myself marriageable. Books, I admitted. History. I used to hide in my father's library and read about ancient Rome, the Tudor court, the French Revolution. I wanted to understand how the world worked, how power shifted, how people survived when everything fell apart. And now, his gray eyes were intent on mine. Do you feel like everything has fallen apart? No, I said slowly, realizing it was true. I feel like I'm finally learning to see clearly. He reached across the small distance between our chairs and took my hand. His fingers were warm, slightly rough from the work in the garden. Good, he murmured. We sat like that for a long moment, hands intertwined, the dinner forgotten. The candles cast dancing shadows across his face, and I found myself memorizing every angle, every line, every fleeting expression. Alaric, I said softly. In the music room, you said that when something happened between us, it would be because I wanted it. His hand tightened on mine. Yes. I want to be clear about something. I took a breath, gathering my courage. I do want it. Not because I'm trying to prove anything or fulfill an obligation. Because when I'm with you, I feel more alive than I have in years. Because you see me, really see me, in a way no one else ever has. He stood abruptly, pulling me to my feet with him. For a heartbeat, we stood frozen, his hands on my waist, my palms flat against his chest where I could feel his heart racing. Clara, he said, my name a prayer and a warning. If we do this, I know what I'm doing, I interrupted. For the first time in my life, I actually know what I'm doing. His control shattered. He kissed me with a fierce intensity that stole my breath, his hands tangling in my hair, pulling me closer. I gasped against his mouth, and he took advantage, deepening the kiss until I forgot where I ended and he began. This wasn't the polite, chaste kisses Edward had given me during our courtship. This was wild and desperate and real. This was two people who'd spent too long being careful, being controlled, finally allowing themselves to feel. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. No going back, he whispered. I don't want to go back, I said, and I meant it. Whatever this marriage had started as, a transaction, a escape, a desperate gamble, it was becoming something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously close to fate. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after our wedding. I was in the music room with Alaric, a habit we'd developed in recent days. He would play and I would sit beside him, sometimes reading, sometimes simply listening, always marveling at how the fierce, dangerous man the world feared could create such beauty. Morrison entered with the silver tray, his expression more pinched than usual. A letter, my lord. From the Duke of Ravenswood. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Alaric took the letter without comment, broke the seal, and read. I watched his face carefully, but his expression revealed nothing. Just that careful blankness he wore like armor when he wanted to hide his thoughts. They're coming here, he said finally, handing me the letter. Edward and your sister. They want to heal the family breach and celebrate our marriage properly. I read Edward's flowing script, each word dripping with false warmth and barely concealed desperation. My dear brother, it grieves me that circumstances led to such an unfortunate beginning between our two families. Isolde and I have discussed it at length, and we feel strongly that we must make amends. Family is too precious to lose over matters of the heart. We would be honored to visit Ravenhall next week if you'll have us. Perhaps we might host a small dinner party. Nothing elaborate, just an intimate gathering to show society that there are no hard feelings, that we are all civilized people capable of forgiveness. I remain your devoted brother, Edward. Civilized people capable of forgiveness. I read aloud, my voice flat. How generous of them. Alaric's jaw tightened. You don't have to see them. I can write back and refuse. No. I set the letter down, something hard and cold settling in my chest. Let them come. Clara, I want to see them. I met his eyes, and he must have seen something in my expression that gave him pause. I want to see what's become of them. And I want them to see what's become of me. Understanding flickered across his face. Revenge. Clarity, I corrected. There's a difference. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But Clara, he took my hand, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. They will try to hurt you. Edward will be charming. Your sister will be beautiful and smug. They'll try to make you feel small again. I know. And if they succeed? If they say something that cuts too deep? I turned my hand in his, lacing our fingers together. Over the past 3 weeks, we'd grown comfortable with these small intimacies, touching, hand-holding, stolen kisses in empty corridors. The marriage was becoming real in ways I'd never expected. Then I'll have you, I said simply. Won't I? His eyes darkened with something fierce and possessive. Always. He kissed me then, slow and deep as if sealing a promise. When we broke apart, I rested my head against his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. We should plan the dinner party, I said. If we're going to do this, we should do it properly. Properly meaning? Meaning we show them exactly what they gave up. Alaric's laugh was low and dangerous. Now who's being petty and vindictive? I learned from the best, I murmured. He pressed a kiss to my temple. That's my girl. And despite everything, despite the anxiety already coiling stomach at the thought of seeing Edward and Isolde again, I smiled. They arrived in a rented carriage. That told me everything I needed to know before they even stepped out. I stood beside Alaric at the top of the manor's entrance steps, dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that Mrs. Croft had commissioned specifically for this occasion. Alaric's hand rested at the small of my back, a steady, grounding presence. The carriage door opened and Edward emerged first. He looked tired. The golden glow that had always seemed to surround him had dimmed. His coat was well tailored but not new, and there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there at our almost wedding. Still handsome, certainly, but the easy confidence had been replaced with something more brittle. Then Isolde stepped out and I had to fight to keep my expression neutral. She was still beautiful, that hadn't changed. But there was a hardness around her mouth that I'd never noticed before, and her pale blue gown, while lovely, was at least 2 seasons old. I recognized it from her debut. Brother? Edward called out, his voice bright with forced cheer. And Clara, my dear sister. How wonderful to see you both looking so well. Sister. He'd called me sister, as if the fact that I'd almost married him was a minor detail easily glossed over. Edward, Alaric said coolly. Isolde. Welcome to Ravenhall. We descended the steps to greet them properly. Edward clasped Alaric's hand with enthusiasm that seemed desperate. Isolde embraced me and I smelled desperation too, the faint staleness of a perfume stretched too thin. "Oh, Clara," she breathed in my ear, "what a magnificent house. You've done so well for yourself." The words were congratulatory. The tone was poison. "Thank you," I said pleasantly, stepping back. "Shall we show you to your rooms? You must be exhausted from your journey." As Morrison and the footmen dealt with their luggage, notably less than what Isolde usually traveled with, I caught Edward staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise? Regret? "You look different," he said abruptly. "Do I? More?" He gestured vaguely. "More confident. It suits you." Beside me I felt Alaric stiffen. "Marriage agrees with me," I said lightly. "Yes, well." Edward's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm glad someone is happy." Isolde shot him a sharp look. "Edward means we're both delighted to see you so settled, Clara. Ravenhall is exactly the sort of place I'd always imagined you, quiet, removed from society, buried in the countryside." "Actually," Alaric interjected, his voice silk over steel, "we're hosting a ball next week. All of London society will be attending. We thought it would be the perfect opportunity to introduce Clara as Lady Vane properly." This was news to me, but I kept my expression serene. Edward's face went pale. "A ball? That's quite ambitious." "My wife deserves to be celebrated," Alaric said, his hand tightening possessively on my waist. "Don't you agree, brother?" The emphasis on wife was deliberate. Acclaiming. "Of course," Edward said weakly. Isolde's smile had frozen into something brittle. "How lovely. I'm sure it will be quite the event." "Oh, it will be," I assured her. "After all, we have so much to celebrate." As we led them into the house, I caught Alaric's eye. He gave me the smallest nod of approval. "Round one to us." That evening, I found Isolde in the portrait gallery. She stood before a painting of Alaric's mother, a beautiful woman with dark hair and sad eyes, captured in oils that were now cracking with age. "His mother was an actress, wasn't she?" Isolde said without turning. "How scandalous. And yet here you are, lady of the manor." "Here I am," I agreed, moving to stand beside her. "You must be very proud of yourself." She finally looked at me, and the hatred in her eyes was so pure it was almost refreshing in its honesty. "Stealing my thunder. Marrying the wealthier brother." "I didn't steal anything, Isolde. You made your choice. I made mine." "Did you?" She laughed, a brittle sound. "Or did you just latch onto the first man who would have you after Edward cast you aside?" The words should have hurt. A month ago they would have destroyed me. But I'd spent 3 weeks learning what it felt like to be truly wanted, truly seen. Isolde's venom couldn't touch me anymore. "Is that what you tell yourself?" I asked gently. "That I married Alaric out of desperation?" Her expression flickered. "Didn't you? At first, perhaps. But now?" I smiled, thinking of Alaric's hands in my hair, his laugh when I said something clever, the way he looked at me like I was the most fascinating woman in the world. "Now I wake up every morning grateful that Edward was fool enough to let me go." Isolde's face twisted with rage. "You smug little, Lady Isolde." We both turned to find Alaric in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Lord Alaric," Isolde said, her fury transforming instantly into a dazzling smile. "I was just admiring the portraits. Your family has such history." "Indeed." He moved into the room, but not toward me. Toward Isolde. "Though I find the present far more interesting than the past. Don't you?" I watched, fascinated and horrified, as Isolde's entire demeanor shifted. She moved closer to him, her hand coming to rest on his arm. "I've always thought so," she purred. Though sometimes the past can teach us valuable lessons about what we truly want, about mistakes we've made. Mistakes. Alaric's voice was politely curious. Sometimes we choose poorly, Isolde said, her fingers trailing up his sleeve. Sometimes we realize too late that we picked the wrong brother. The boldness of it took my breath away. She was actually trying to seduce my husband. In his own house, while married to his brother. Isolde, I said sharply, but Alaric held up a hand. It's all right, darling. His eyes never left Isolde's face. I think Lady Isolde is simply confused. Perhaps the country air has affected her judgment. I'm not confused at all, Isolde breathed, pressing closer. I'm seeing clearly for the first time. You're the one with real power, real wealth. Edward is charming, but you're magnificent. And you, Alaric said softly, are exactly as shallow as I always suspected. Isolde froze. Did you truly think I would be flattered? Alaric continued, his voice dropping to something deadly. That I would find it appealing to be your second choice? Your escape plan from the poverty you've created with your own greed and stupidity? I don't. You came here because Edward has spent his entire fortune on your expensive tastes, Alaric said, each word precise and cutting. The duchy is mortgaged to the hilt. The estates are crumbling. And you thought, what? That you could seduce me? Use me to maintain your lifestyle? Isolde's face had gone from red to white. That's not. Get out of my gallery, Alaric said flatly. And if you touch me again, if you so much as look at my wife with that contemptuous expression, I will make certain that every door in London society slams in your face. Do you understand? Isolde fled, her silk skirts whispering against the floor. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. Alaric turned to me and his expression softened. You all right? You knew, I breathed. You knew she would try something. I know desperation when I see it. He crossed to me, cupping my face in his hands. Did you really think I could want her after having you? She's beautiful. She's nothing, he said fiercely. Clara, look at me. I did. You are brilliant and brave and real. She is pretty paint on a rotting foundation. There is no comparison. I kissed him then, desperately, gratefully, until we were both breathless. Thank you, I whispered against his lips. Always, he murmured back. Edward found me in the library the next morning. I was reading, or trying to read, but my mind kept replaying the scene in the portrait gallery. Isolde hadn't come down for breakfast, claiming a headache. Alaric had looked satisfied. Clara. Edward's voice made me jump. I hoped I'd find you alone. I set down my book slowly. Edward, is something wrong? He closed the library door behind him, and something about the gesture made my skin prickle with unease. I wanted to apologize, he said, moving closer. For everything. For what happened at the wedding. For hurting you. That's kind of you. No, it's not kind. It's necessary. He sat in the chair across from mine, leaning forward earnestly. Clara, I made a terrible mistake. My fingers tightened on the book in my lap. What do you mean? Isolde. Leaving you. All of it. He ran a hand through his golden hair. I was swept up in passion, in the excitement of something forbidden. But passion fades, Clara. And when it did, I realized what I'd lost. Edward, you, he interrupted. I lost you. My best friend. The woman who understood me, who was kind and patient and everything Isolde isn't. You need to stop. I stood, but he stood too, catching my hand. Just listen. Please. His blue eyes were intense, pleading. Isolde is impossible. She spends money we don't have. She's never satisfied. She makes me miserable. But you always made me happy. We were good together, weren't we? I tried to pull my hand free, but he held tight. We could be good together again, he continued, his voice dropping to something intimate. I know you're married to Alaric now, but everyone knows it's a marriage of convenience. He doesn't love you. He can't, he doesn't know how to love. But I do, Clara. I love you. I always have. You're insane, I breathed. Am I? Or am I just being honest? He pulled me closer. Leave him. Come away with me. We can go to the continent, start fresh. You're married. So are you. His grip on my wrist was painful now. But we both know those marriages don't mean anything. Yours is a business arrangement and mine is a disaster. We could fix this, Clara. We could have what we were supposed to have. What you were supposed to have? I repeated, anger flooding through me. You mean what you threw away? What you destroyed in front of 300 people? You don't get to come back now that your passion has faded and expect me to, what? Be your mistress? Your consolation prize? It wouldn't be like that. Get your hands off my wife. We both spun to find Alaric in the doorway, and I'd never seen him look so dangerous. His eyes were flat and cold, his body coiled with violence barely contained. Edward dropped my wrist as if burned. Alaric, you were just leaving, Alaric said, each word bitten off. And you will never touch her again. You will never speak to her alone again. And if I find out you've so much as looked at her wrong, I will call you out. Call me out. Edward's laugh was nervous. You challenge me to a duel? Over a misunderstanding? No misunderstanding. Alaric crossed the room, placing himself between Edward and me. I heard every word. Every pathetic, grasping attempt to manipulate my wife into betraying me. Edward's face flushed red. She was mine first. She was never yours, Alaric snarled. You had the opportunity to treasure her, and you threw her away like garbage. Now she's mine, and I will protect what's mine. The two brothers faced each other, and I could see the years of resentment crackling between them. The legitimate son and the bastard. The golden heir and the dark horse. All their childhood rivalry crystallizing in this moment. You've always been jealous of me, Edward said, his voice shaking. Always wanted what I had. I don't want what you had, Alaric said softly. I want what you were too stupid to keep. He turned to me, his expression gentling. Are you all right? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Good. He looked back at Edward. You and your wife will leave today. The dinner party is cancelled. And you will never set foot on my property again. You can't, I can. And I will. Alaric's smile was razor sharp. Unless you'd like me to tell all of London society that the Duke of Ravenswood tried to convince his brother's wife to become his mistress? I wonder how that would affect your already damaged reputation. Edward went pale. You wouldn't. Try me. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Edward turned and left without another word. The moment the door closed, I sagged against the bookshelf, my legs suddenly weak. Alaric caught me, pulling me into his arms. It's all right. You're safe. He really thought I couldn't finish the sentence. He thought you were as miserable as he is, Alaric said, stroking my hair. He thought because he made a mistake you must have too. He couldn't conceive that you might actually be happy. I am happy, I whispered. God help me, I'm actually happy. He pulled back to look at me, his gray eyes searching mine. Are you? Truly? Yes. Even though our marriage started as a transaction? Especially because of that, I said. Because it means everything that's happened since has been real. We chose this. We're still choosing this. He kissed me then, deep and claiming, and I tasted possession and promise and something that felt dangerously close to love. We held the ball anyway. Despite Edward and Isolde's hasty departure, or perhaps because of it, Alaric insisted we proceed with our plans to introduce me to society as Lady Vane. "Let them run back to London with their tails between their legs," he said as we reviewed the guest list. "We'll show society exactly what they're missing." The night of the ball, Ravenhall was transformed. Every chandelier blazed with candles. The ballroom, rarely used since Alaric's father's death, gleamed with fresh polish. Flowers filled every available surface, and an orchestra tuned their instruments in the gallery. I stood in my dressing room, watching Mrs. Croft and the maids put the final touches on my gown. It was deep burgundy silk, the color of wine and roses, cut in the latest fashion. Rubies, Alaric's mother's rubies, glittered at my throat and wrists. I looked like a duchess. I looked like power. I looked like someone Isolde would hate. "You're smiling, my lady," Mrs. Croft observed. "Am I?" "Like a cat who's found the cream." "Perhaps I have," I murmured. Alaric was waiting for me at the top of the grand staircase, devastating in black evening clothes. When he saw me, something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. "You're magnificent," he said, offering his arm. "We match," I observed. "Dark and dangerous. Exactly as we should be." The guests were already arriving, a glittering parade of London society, all desperately curious about the scandalous marriage between Lord Alaric and the jilted bride. I could see the speculation in their eyes, hear the whispers behind their fans. "Did you hear what happened with the Duke of Ravenswood? They say he tried to seduce Lady Vane back." "No, I heard it was Lady Isolde who threw herself at Lord Alaric. Shameless, the both of them." The rumors had spread exactly as Alaric had predicted. By the time Edward and Isolde returned to London, the story had already been told, and not in their favor. Lady Vane. The Duchess of Westmere approached, her expression warm. "What a magnificent ball. You must be so pleased." "Very pleased, Your Grace." "And is it true? Did your sister really attempt to—" She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Well, you know. I'm afraid I couldn't possibly comment on my sister's behavior," I said with perfect propriety. "Though I will say that Lord Alaric and I are very happy together." "Blissfully so." The Duchess beamed. "I can see that. You positively glow, my dear." As she moved away, I felt Alaric's hand tighten on my waist. "Well played," he murmured. "I learned from watching you." The ball continued in a whirl of music and champagne and carefully orchestrated social triumph. Everyone who mattered had come. Everyone wanted to congratulate us, to see the notorious Lord Alaric and his unexpected bride. And through it all, Alaric never left my side. Never let anyone question my position or my worth. When Lady Pemberton made a veiled comment about hasty marriages, Alaric shut her down with a single cutting remark. When Lord Ashbury suggested I must miss the excitement of London, Alaric smiled and said I was far too intelligent to prefer shallow society to genuine partnership. He defended me, protected me, claimed me in front of everyone who'd ever doubted me. Later, as we waltzed together in the center of the ballroom, I looked up at him and felt my heart do something dangerous. "Thank you," I said softly. "For what?" "For this. For making me feel like I matter." His hand tightened on my waist, pulling me closer than was strictly proper. "You do matter, Clara. You matter more than anything." The words hung between us, weighted with meaning. "Alaric, I know," he interrupted, his eyes dark and intense. "I know." The waltz ended and the crowd applauded, but I barely heard them. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, thundering in my ears, telling me what I'd been trying to deny for weeks. I was falling in love with my husband. My convenient, practical, supposedly temporary husband. And from the way he was looking at me, like I was the only person in a room full of hundreds, I suspected he might be falling too. The letter arrived 3 days after the ball, delivered by royal messenger. I was having breakfast with Alaric in the morning room when Morrison brought it in, his face grave. The seal bore the mark of the king's court. Alaric broke the seal and read in silence. I watched the color drain from his face, the first time I'd ever seen him visibly shaken. "What is it?" I asked, setting down my teacup. He didn't answer immediately, just handed me the letter with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Lord Alaric Vane is hereby summoned to appear before the King's Bench to answer charges of high treason. Evidence has been presented that Lord Vane did willfully conspire with French agents to transmit sensitive information regarding His Majesty's naval operations during his time in Vienna. He is to surrender himself to the authorities within 7 days or be declared an outlaw and fugitive." The words blurred before my eyes. Treason. They were accusing him of treason. "This is insane," I breathed. "You would never—" "No, I wouldn't." His voice was eerily calm, but I could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. "But someone has gone to considerable trouble to make it appear that I did." "Who would do this?" But even as I asked, I knew. Isolde. As if summoned by thought, Morrison returned with another letter, this one in familiar feminine handwriting. "Dear Clara, I thought you should know that certain documents have come to light regarding your husband's activities in Vienna. Such a shame. I always thought him a patriot despite his French blood. But I suppose the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? His mother was French after all. One wonders where his true loyalties lie. Of course, if Lord Alaric were to make certain financial arrangements, say transferring a significant portion of his wealth to Edward to settle old family debts, I'm sure these unfortunate accusations could be made to disappear. The witness who provided the documents is quite amenable to reconsidering his testimony. For the right price. Do think about it, Clara. It would be terrible to see your husband hang for treason, especially when you've only just started to enjoy being Lady Vane. Your devoted sister, Isolde P.S. The sum required is £50,000. A bargain really for a man's life. The letter fell from my numb fingers. "Blackmail," I whispered. "She's blackmailing us." Alaric's expression had gone cold and hard as stone. "She's forged documents. Bribed someone to claim they witnessed me passing information to French agents. And now she wants me to pay for the privilege of not being executed for crimes I didn't commit." "We have to pay her," I said immediately. £50,000 is nothing compared to your life. "No." "Alaric, no," he repeated more forcefully. "I will not give that viper 1 penny. And I will not run from false accusations like a guilty man." "Then what will you do?" He stood, pacing to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "I'll go to London. I'll face the charges. And I'll prove my innocence." "And if you can't?" My voice broke on the words. "If the evidence is too convincing? If they believe her lies?" He turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw something that made my blood run cold. Fear. Lord Alaric Vane, the man who feared nothing, was afraid. "Then I'll hang," he said quietly. "And you'll be free." "Free?" I was on my feet, crossing to him. "You think I want to be free of you?" "Clara, I love you," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I love you, you impossible, infuriating man. And I am not going to sit here while Isolde destroys you." His hands came up to frame my face. "You love me?" "Of course I love you. How could I not?" Tears were streaming down my face now. "And I'm not going to lose you. We'll fight this. Together." "Together?" he repeated and kissed me with desperate intensity. When we broke apart, his expression had hardened with resolve. "Then we need to move quickly," he said. "If Isolde has forged documents, there will be proof of the forgery. We just need to find it." How? A dangerous smile curved his lips. By being smarter than she is. Which, fortunately, isn't difficult. We returned to London that very day. Not to Ravenhall's townhouse, but to Alaric's private residence in Bloomsbury, a place even I hadn't known existed. It was smaller than the manor, more discreet, tucked away on a quiet street. I use it for research, Alaric explained as we entered. And for storing things I don't want generally known. The interior was extraordinary, more library than home, with books stacked floor to ceiling, scientific instruments on every surface, and papers covered in calculations and diagrams. What kind of research? I asked, picking up a journal filled with notes in multiple languages. Everything, he said, already pulling books from shelves. Mesmerism, chemistry, codes, and ciphers. After my mother died, I traveled Europe learning from anyone who would teach me. Not just academics, spies, forgers, occultists. I wanted to understand how the world really worked. How power was gained and lost. You were preparing for something like this. I was preparing for anything. He spread documents across a desk. My mother was destroyed by rumors and lies. I swore I'd never be helpless like she was. For the next 3 days we barely slept. Alaric reached out to his network of contacts, people I'd never imagined existed. Former intelligence operatives, document experts, even a reformed forger who owed Alaric a favor from Vienna. The forger arrived on the second day, a nervous little man named Pritchard who examined the evidence against Alaric with a jeweler's loupe. "Oh, this is sloppy work," he muttered. "Very sloppy. See here? The ink is wrong. This supposedly dates from 1823, but this particular formulation wasn't available until 1824. And the paper?" He held it to the light. "The watermark is from a mill that didn't start producing this grade until last year. Can you prove it?" I asked. "In court? Absolutely. Any competent expert would see it immediately." He peered at Alaric over his spectacles. Someone was either very stupid or very desperate. "Both," Alaric said grimly. "What about the witness? The man claiming he saw me pass documents." "Ah, yes. One Mr. Geoffrey Hastings." Pritchard consulted his notes. "Recently employed by the Duke of Ravenswood as his new estate manager. Heavily in debt. Very motivated to earn extra income by providing convenient testimony." My hands clenched into fists. Edward knew about this. He had to have known. "Of course he knew," Alaric said. "This is his last desperate attempt to destroy me. If he can't have my money willingly, he'll try to take it by force. If I'm executed for treason, my estates would be forfeit to the crown, but he'd petition to have them as the legitimate heir. That's monstrous. That's survival." Alaric's expression was bleak. "He's broke, Clara. Desperate. And desperate men do monstrous things. I thought of Edward in the library trying to convince me to run away with him. The calculation in his eyes. The entitlement. What do we do?" I asked. "We expose them," Alaric said. "All of them. Before my hearing in 4 days." That night, unable to sleep, I found Alaric in his study, staring at a portrait I'd never seen before. A beautiful woman with dark hair and sad eyes, his mother. "She was 20 when she met my father," he said without turning. "An actress in Paris. He was touring the continent, sowing wild oats before settling down to marry someone appropriate. They fell in love. I moved to stand beside him, taking his hand. He married her in secret," Alaric continued. "Promised her they'd announce it once they returned to England. But when they did, his family was horrified. A French actress? Unthinkable. They told him to annul the marriage, pay her off, forget she existed. But he didn't. No. He loved her too much. So they reached a compromise. He'd keep her hidden, set her up in a cottage in Hampshire, visit when he could. In exchange, the family wouldn't destroy her completely, and any children would be provided for if not publicly acknowledged. That's horrible. That's aristocracy. His voice was bitter. I was born in that cottage. Grew up watching my mother wait for a man who could only love her in shadows. She died when I was 15, still waiting for him to choose her publicly. He legitimized me on his deathbed, but by then, it was too late, I finished softly. Edward's mother had already poisoned society against me. The bastard son. The French actress's brat. When I went to Vienna, it was partly to study but mostly to escape the whispers. He turned to face me and I saw the vulnerability beneath his careful control. The scar, I said, touching the thin line on his cheekbone. How did you get it? A duel. Not over a woman as the rumors say. Over my mother's honor. His eyes were distant, remembering. A French count said she'd been his mistress, that I was probably his bastard instead of the Duke's. I called him out. We fought. He gave me this, he touched the scar. And I gave him a punctured lung. He lived, but he never repeated the lie. Good? I said fiercely. Alaric's laugh was surprised. Good? He deserved worse. Anyone who insults you deserves worse. He pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. How did I get so lucky? He murmured into my hair. You married a woman desperate enough to propose to a stranger. No. I married a woman brave enough to save herself. And now, his voice roughened. Now she's trying to save me. We're saving each other, I corrected. That's what partners do. He kissed me then, deep and claiming, and I tasted desperation beneath the passion. Fear that we were running out of time. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. Clara, if something happens to me, nothing will happen to you. But if it does, Alaric, stop. Listen to me. He gripped my shoulders. If I'm convicted, if they execute me, you need to know something. My will leaves everything to you. The estates, the money, all of it. You'll be provided for. Protected. I don't want your money, I said, tears streaming down my face. I want you. I know. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. If the worst happens, don't let them destroy you. Don't let Isolde or Edward or anyone make you feel small again. You're stronger than all of them. Braver. Better. Promise me you'll remember that. I promise, I whispered. But only if you promise to fight. To not give up. I promise. We stood there in the candlelight, holding each other, two people who'd found love in the unlikeliest of circumstances, facing a future that grew darker with each passing hour. The next morning, everything changed. I woke to find Alaric's side of the bed empty and cold. Assuming he'd risen early to continue working, I dressed and went downstairs. I found him collapsed in his study. Alaric. I fell to my knees beside him, my hands shaking as I checked for a pulse. It was there but weak and thready. His skin was clammy, his breathing shallow. Morrison. I screamed. Get a doctor. Now. The household erupted into chaos. Servants running, someone being dispatched for the doctor, Mrs. Croft appearing with blankets and smelling salts. I cradled Alaric's head in my lap, stroking his hair, trying to keep the panic at bay. Don't you dare leave me, I whispered fiercely. Don't you dare. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Clara? I'm here. I'm right here. Poisoned? He managed. The brandy, last night? Horror washed over me. Oh, who gave you brandy? But I already knew. The night before, a gift basket had arrived. Fine French brandy and chocolates. The card had said it was from a well-wisher who hopes for justice. We'd assumed it was from one of Alaric's contacts. We'd been wrong. I looked at Morrison. Find that basket. Find everything from it. Don't let anyone touch it. My lady, do it. The doctor arrived within the hour, a brisk, efficient man named Dr. Patterson who'd treated difficult cases before. He examined Alaric, asked questions, studied the half-empty bottle of brandy Morrison had retrieved. Arsenic, he said finally. Not a lethal dose, thankfully, but enough to make him seriously ill. If he'd drunk the whole bottle, he didn't need to finish. We all knew. Can you save him? I asked. Yes, but he'll be weak for days. Possibly weeks. The hearing is in 3 days, I said desperately. He has to be able to appear. Impossible. He won't even be able to stand by then. I looked down at Alaric, now sleeping fitfully under the doctor's care, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Isolde had tried to kill him. When blackmail hadn't worked, when we'd started to uncover her lies, she tried to murder him. Either to prevent him from defending himself, or simply out of spite. My sister. My own blood. She destroyed my wedding, stolen the man I'd thought I loved, mocked my pain, tried to seduce my husband, framed him for treason, and now attempted murder. And she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated me. I stood, smoothing my skirts, and turned to Morrison. Send word to Mr. Pritchard. Tell him I need to see him immediately. And send for my lawyer. My lady? If Lord Alaric can't appear at the hearing, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning through me, then I'll appear for him. As his wife, I have the right to speak on his behalf. Clara, no. Alaric's voice was weak but urgent. It's too dangerous. You promised to fight, I reminded him, kneeling beside the couch where the doctor had settled him. So did I. And I keep my promises. I kissed his forehead gently. Sleep, I murmured. Heal. And let me handle my sister. His hand caught mine weakly. I love you, he whispered. I know, I said, smiling through my tears. I love you too. Which is why I'm going to destroy everyone who's hurt you. The King's Bench was packed. Everyone who mattered had come to see the scandalous trial of Lord Alaric Vane. Accused traitor, suspected French spy, the bastard son who'd risen too high. I sat in the front row, dressed in black silk like a widow preparing for mourning. Let them think what they wanted. Let them whisper. I had evidence. I had witnesses. And I had rage. The prosecution presented their case first. Mr. Hastings, Edward's estate manager, testified that he'd seen Alaric pass documents to a French agent in Vienna in 1823. The forged papers were submitted as evidence. Then it was my turn. I stood and the courtroom fell silent. My lords, I began, my voice clear and steady. I appear today on behalf of my husband, Lord Alaric Vane, who cannot be present due to being poisoned 3 days ago in an attempt to prevent him from defending himself against these false charges. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Poisoned? The judge repeated. By whom? By the same people who forged these documents, I said, gesturing to the evidence. The same people who bribed Mr. Hastings to perjure himself. The same people who stand to gain everything if my husband is executed. I nodded to Mr. Pritchard, who stepped forward with his analysis. These documents are forgeries, my lord. The ink, the paper, the watermark, all prove they were created within the last year, not in 1823 as claimed. Any expert can verify this. The judge examined the documents himself, his expression growing darker. And Mr. Hastings, I continued, turning to face Edward's estate manager, was paid £500 by the Duke of Ravenswood to provide false testimony. We have the bank records. Hastings went white as a sheet. This is outrageous. Edward's lawyer jumped to his feet. The Duke of Ravenswood is not on trial here. Perhaps he should be, I said coldly. Along with his wife, Lady Isolde, who sent the poison brandy that nearly killed my husband. I held up Isolde's note, the one that had accompanied the gift basket. She'd been too arrogant to disguise her handwriting. To Lord Alaric, with hopes for swift justice. May you rest peacefully knowing the truth will prevail. A well-wisher. The basket was delivered by a boy who identified Lady Isolde as the one who'd paid him, I continued. We have his sworn statement. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order! Into the chaos, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Isolde walked in, flanked by constables. She looked different from the poised beauty I'd known all my life. Her hair was disheveled. Her dress was wrinkled. And in her eyes was the wild panic of a trapped animal. Lady Isolde, the judge said coldly, you are charged with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. How do you plead? This is absurd. Isolde's voice was shrill. Clara is lying. She's always been jealous of me, always wanted what I had, what you had. I repeated, standing to face her. You mean what you stole? My fiancé? My grandmother's necklace? My dignity? You married his brother out of spite. I married him out of survival, I said quietly. And I fell in love with him because he's everything you and Edward could never be. Honorable. Loyal. Real. Isolde's face twisted with hatred. You think you've won? You think, I know I've won, I interrupted. Because you're going to prison, Isolde. You and Edward both. And I'm going home to my husband. The judge banged his gavel again. Based on the evidence presented, I'm dismissing all charges against Lord Alaric Vane. Furthermore, I'm ordering the arrest of the Duke of Ravenswood and his wife for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Take them away. The constables moved toward Isolde. She struggled, screaming obscenities, but they dragged her out nonetheless. Edward, I learned later, had fled London the moment he heard about the hearing. But he wouldn't get far. Justice had a long reach. I left the courtroom in silence, ignoring the shouted questions from the crowd, the attempts by reporters to get my statement. All I wanted was to go home. To Alaric. I found Alaric sitting up when I returned, pale but awake, with Dr. Patterson hovering nearby. You should be resting, I said, crossing the room to him. I couldn't rest. Not while you were. He stopped, his eyes searching my face. What happened? We won. I sank onto the couch beside him, suddenly exhausted. All charges dismissed. Isolde and Edward arrested. It's over. For a moment he just stared at me. Then he pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. You magnificent, terrifying woman, he murmured against my hair. You walked into the king's bench and destroyed them. They tried to kill you. My voice was muffled against his chest. They tried to take you from me. I couldn't let that stand. Clara. He pulled back to look at me, his gray eyes intense. Do you understand what you've done? You've made enemies. Powerful people who won't forget this. Good, I said fiercely. Let them remember. Let them know that Lady Clara Vane protects what's hers. Something blazed in his eyes. Pride, desire, love. Say that again, he demanded. Let them know. No. The other part. I smiled, understanding. That I protect what's mine? Am I yours, Clara? His voice was rough, urgent. Truly yours. Yes, I whispered. Just as I'm yours. Completely. Always. He kissed me then, and despite his weakness, despite the poison still working its way through his system, there was nothing tentative about it. It was claiming and promise and forever all wrapped into one desperate, passionate moment. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, Dr. Patterson cleared his throat pointedly. "My lord should rest," he said, though there was amusement in his eyes. "And Lady Vane should eat something. You've both been through quite an ordeal." "Yes, doctor," I said meekly, but I didn't move from Alaric's side. The doctor left with instructions about medicines and rest, and finally we were alone. "Tell me everything," Alaric said, his fingers lacing through mine. So I did. I told him about the courtroom, about Pritchard's testimony, about the moment Isolde was dragged away screaming. I told him how it felt to finally have justice. "Your parents?" Alaric said quietly. "How did they take it?" I'd been dreading this question. "My mother fainted. My father? He looked at me like he'd never seen me before. I think they expected me to protect Isolde, to lie for her the way I always have. But you didn't." "No. I protected you instead." I met his eyes. "I chose you, Alaric. Over my family, over everything I was raised to believe about loyalty and duty. I chose you. And I would choose you," he said fiercely. "Over everything. Every time." We sat in silence for a moment, just holding each other, letting the enormity of what we'd survived settle over us. "What happens now?" I asked finally. Alaric's smile was slow and dangerous. Now we rebuild. We show London society exactly who we are. And we make damn sure no one ever tries to destroy us again." 6 weeks later, I stood in the drawing room of our London townhouse, reading the morning papers. The headlines were delicious. "Duke of Ravenswood arrested in Dover, Lady Isolde Thornton sentenced to 7 years, the fall of the Golden Duke." A cautionary tale: Edward had been caught trying to board a ship to France. He'd been stripped of his title pending investigation. His estate ceased to pay his debts. The Duchy of Ravenswood, it turned out, was mortgaged beyond salvation. Isolde had been tried and convicted of attempted murder. 7 years in prison. Her beauty would fade behind bars. Her schemes would rot in darkness. And me? I was Lady Clara Vane, wife of the wealthiest untitled man in England, the woman who'd stood before the King's bench and won. "Enjoying yourself?" Alaric asked, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. "Tremendously." I leaned back against him, savoring his warmth, his strength, his aliveness. "Is that terrible?" "Not at all. They tried to destroy us. It's only natural to enjoy watching them fail." I turned in his arms to face him. He looked healthy again, the color back in his face, the strength returned to his body. Dr. Patterson had declared him fully recovered last week. "My father wants to meet with us," I said carefully. "He sent a note." Alaric's expression cooled. "To apologize for raising a daughter who tried to murder his son-in-law? To apologize for not seeing what Isolde was," I corrected. "He's devastated, Alaric. He thought he knew his children. He thought you were the boring one and she was the prize," Alaric finished bluntly. "And now he's realized he was catastrophically wrong." "Yes." He studied my face. "Do you want to see him?" "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to slam the door in his face the way he slammed it in my heart every time he chose Isolde over me. But part of me still loves him, Alaric finished gently. "Because he's your father, and love doesn't die just because someone fails us." I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. "Then we'll see him," Alaric decided. "Together. And he'll hear exactly how things stand. Which is that you're mine now. My wife, my partner, my equal. And anyone who treats you as less than that, family or not, will answer to me." I kissed him, pouring all my gratitude and love into it. "What did I do to deserve you?" I whispered. "You proposed to a stranger in a cathedral," he said, smiling against my lips. "Best decision you ever made." "Second best," I corrected. Oh. The best decision was falling in love with him. That night we returned to Ravenhall. London had served its purpose. Justice had been done, society had witnessed our triumph. But the city felt stifling now, full of memories and ghosts. We needed to go home. The manor welcomed us back with all its Gothic grandeur. The black lake reflected the stars. The gargoyles stood sentinel. And inside, fires blazed in every hearth, driving away the autumn chill. I've missed this place, I said, standing in the entrance hall. Have you? Alaric looked surprised. Most people find it frightening. Most people are fools. I turned to him, taking his hands. This is where we became real, Alaric. This is where a marriage of convenience became something true. His eyes darkened. Clara, I want you, I said boldly. Properly. Completely. No more separate wings. No more careful distance. I want to be your wife in every sense of the word. Are you certain? His voice was strained, controlled. Once we crossed this line, we crossed it weeks ago, I interrupted. In the music room. In the garden. Every time you looked at me like I mattered. Every time I chose you over everything else. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands framing my face. I love you, he said, the words fierce and raw. I love your courage and your cleverness and your terrible sense of humor. I love how you named a fox after your sister and laughed at the absurdity of it all. I love that you walked into a courtroom and eviscerated everyone who'd hurt us. I kissed him, stopping the words because I couldn't bear the intensity of them, couldn't breathe through the emotion. He lifted me into his arms, still strong despite everything, and carried me up the grand staircase. Not to my wing or his, but to the master suite in the center of the house. The rooms that had belonged to his parents left empty for years. Are you sure? I asked as he set me on my feet. This is our house now, he said. Our future. No more shadows. No more secrets. He kissed me again, slower this time, his hands moving to the fastenings of my dress with practiced ease. I helped him, suddenly desperate to feel his skin against mine, to erase every barrier between us. When we were finally bare to each other, he paused, his eyes drinking me in. Beautiful, he murmured. You're so damn beautiful, Clara. So are you, I whispered, running my hands over the planes of his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. What followed was passion and tenderness intertwined. The consummation of a marriage that had started in desperation and transformed into something profound. He was gentle but demanding, patient but fierce, and I met him with equal intensity. Afterward, we lay tangled together in the massive bed, moonlight streaming through the windows, our breathing slowly returning to normal. No regrets. Alaric asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my bare shoulder. Only that we waited so long, I said, smiling up at him. He laughed, the sound free and genuine. We had a few things to deal with first. Blackmail, treason, attempted murder, minor inconveniences, I interrupted, and he laughed harder. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you, he said, suddenly serious. You already do. I kissed his jaw. You gave me back myself, Alaric. You saw me when everyone else looked through me. You made me strong. You were always strong. I just gave you permission to show it. We lay in silence for a while, just holding each other, marveling at how something that had started so badly could end so perfectly. Alaric, I said eventually. What happened to the fox? The one you named Isolde. He grinned. Healed completely. I released her back to the forest last week. She bit me one last time before she ran off. Perfect, I murmured. Absolutely perfect. I woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Alaric sat in a chair by the window, already dressed, reading correspondence. When he saw I was awake, he smiled, a real smile, unguarded and warm. "Good morning, wife." "Good morning, husband." I stretched, feeling deliciously sore in places I'd never been sore before. "What are you reading?" "An invitation." He brought it to the bed, sitting beside me. "From the king." I sat up quickly, clutching the sheets. "The king? He wants to meet us. Personally commend us for our service to the crown in exposing traitors." Alaric's tone was dry. "Apparently, rooting out false accusations and attempted murder makes us heroes. We're being invited to court? More than that." He handed me another letter. "He's considering granting me a title, elevating me from lord to earl, perhaps even duke." I stared at the letter, then at him. "You'd be the Duke of Ravenhall? If I accept." "Why wouldn't you accept?" He was quiet for a moment, his expression complicated. "Because I spent my whole life refusing to care about titles. Refusing to let society's approval matter. Accepting it now feels like letting them win?" I finished. "Like admitting you needed their validation all along?" "Yes." I took his hand, choosing my words carefully. "Or it could be justice. Not the vindictive kind, but the real kind. Your mother was hidden away because society deemed her unworthy. You were called a bastard even after legitimization. Now the king himself wants to honor you. That's not society winning, Alaric. That's you proving they were wrong about you from the start." He looked at me with such love it took my breath away. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured. "You married a woman desperate enough to propose to a stranger," I said, echoing his words from before. "Best decision I ever made." We spent the morning in bed talking about the future. About whether to accept the title. About expanding the London house. About traveling to Vienna so Alaric could show me the places he'd lived and studied. About children, eventually, though neither of us was in a hurry. "I want them to grow up knowing they're loved," Alaric said quietly. "Not hidden away. Not made to feel like mistakes. They will be," I promised. "So loved they'll probably be insufferable." He laughed. Insufferable children. What a thought. A knock at the door interrupted us. Morrison's voice came through, carefully neutral. "My lord, my lady. You have visitors." "Who?" Alaric called back. "Lord and Lady Thornton. Lady Clara's parents." I looked at Alaric. He squeezed my hand. "Together?" he asked. "Together," I confirmed. Spring 1831. The Duchess of Ravenhall stood in the portrait gallery of Ravenhall, adjusting the frame of the newest edition. That's what they called me now. Duchess. When Alaric had accepted the king's offer, I'd become something I never imagined, nobility in my own right, not just by marriage. The portrait showed Alaric and me with our 2 children, James, aged 3 with his father's gray eyes and my brown hair, and baby Elizabeth, barely a year old, already showing signs of her father's stubborn temperament. "Mama?" James came running down the gallery, his nursemaid following apologetically. "Mama, Papa says there's a surprise in the garden." "Does he?" I scooped my son up, kissing his forehead. "And what kind of surprise?" "Puppies," James squealed. "Fox puppies." I laughed because of course Alaric had found orphan fox kits. He had a weakness for rescuing things. Foxes, wounded birds, jilted brides at altars. "Let's go see them," I said, taking James's hand. We walked through the manor, no longer dark and frightening to me but home. The portrait gallery we'd expanded with pictures of our growing family. The music room where Alaric still played piano every night. The library where I'd written and published 2 books on women's legal rights, much to society's shock. Outside, spring had transformed the gardens into something magical. The wild roses were blooming. The black lake reflected blue sky instead of storm clouds. And there was Alaric, sitting in the grass in his shirt sleeves, holding Elizabeth while James immediately ran to the box of fox kits. "You're incorrigible," I said, sitting beside him. "You love it," he countered, kissing me softly. "I love you," I corrected. "Same thing." We sat together watching our children play, and I thought about that day in the cathedral 5 years ago. The humiliation, the desperation, the wild gamble of proposing to a stranger. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked suddenly. "That day in the cathedral? Accepting my proposal?" Alaric turned to me, his gray eyes, still as intense as ever, locked on mine. "Not for a single second," he said. "You gave me everything, Clara. A real marriage, real love, a family, a purpose beyond just existing. You made me believe I deserved happiness." "You do deserve it," I said fiercely. "You always did. So do you." He kissed my temple. "The girl who was always second best, always overlooked. Look at you now. A duchess, an author, a mother, the most formidable woman in England. Only because you saw me first," I said. "No. I just had the privilege of being there when you finally saw yourself." James came running back with a kid in his arms. "Look, Mama. She's got white paws." "She's beautiful," I said. "What will you name her?" James thought for a moment, then grinned mischievously. "So much his father's son. Aunt Isolde." Alaric and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. "That's perfect, darling," I managed between giggles. "Absolutely perfect." Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Alaric and I stood on the terrace overlooking the lake. Music drifted from inside, the orchestra warming up for the dinner party we were hosting tomorrow. All of London society would come. They always did now. We were the couple everyone wanted to know, the love story everyone whispered about. The girl jilted at the altar who'd become a duchess. The dangerous lord who'd found his match. "Do you ever wonder what happened to them?" I asked quietly, though I already knew. Edward had died 2 years ago in poverty, his title never restored. Isolde had been released from prison 6 months ago, broken and aged beyond her years. Last I'd heard, she was living in a rented room in Brighton, supported by distant cousins' charity. "No," Alaric said simply. "They're ghosts, and we're alive." He was right. We were so vividly, brilliantly alive. "Dance with me," I said suddenly. "Here? There's no music." "There's always music," I said, stepping into his arms. We danced on the terrace as the stars came out. No audience, no rules, just two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and built something extraordinary from the ashes of disaster. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too," he murmured back. "My bride, my duchess, my Clara." And somewhere in the forest, a fox with white paws howled at the moon, wild and free and absolutely perfect. Just like us. Spring 1831. The Duchess of Ravenhall stood in the portrait gallery of Ravenhall, adjusting the frame of the newest edition. That's what they called me now. Duchess. When Alaric had accepted the king's offer, I'd become something I never imagined, nobility in my own right, not just by marriage. The portrait showed Alaric and me with our 2 children, James, aged 3 with his father's gray eyes and my brown hair, and baby Elizabeth, barely a year old, already showing signs of her father's stubborn temperament. "Mama?" James came running down the gallery, his nursemaid following apologetically. "Mama, Papa says there's a surprise in the garden." "Does he?" I scooped my son up, kissing his forehead. "And what kind of surprise?" "Puppies," James squealed. "Fox puppies." I laughed because of course Alaric had found orphan fox kits. He had a weakness for rescuing things, foxes, wounded birds, jilted brides at altars. Let's go see them, I said, taking James's hand. We walked through the manor, no longer dark and frightening to me but home. The portrait gallery we'd expanded with pictures of our growing family. The music room where Alaric still played piano every night. The library where I'd written and published 2 books on women's legal rights, much to society's shock. Outside, spring had transformed the gardens into something magical. The wild roses were blooming. The black lake reflected blue sky instead of storm clouds. And there was Alaric, sitting in the grass in his shirt sleeves, holding Elizabeth while James immediately ran to the box of fox kits. "You're incorrigible," I said, sitting beside him. "You love it," he countered, kissing me softly. "I love you," I corrected. "Same thing." We sat together watching our children play, and I thought about that day in the cathedral 5 years ago. The humiliation, the desperation, the wild gamble of proposing to a stranger. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked suddenly. "That day in the cathedral? Accepting my proposal?" Alaric turned to me, his gray eyes, still as intense as ever, locked on mine. "Not for a single second," he said. "You gave me everything, Clara. A real marriage, real love, a family, a purpose beyond just existing. You made me believe I deserved happiness." "You do deserve it," I said fiercely. "You always did. So do you." He kissed my temple. "The girl who was always second best, always overlooked. Look at you now. A duchess, an author, a mother. The most formidable woman in England. Only because you saw me first," I said. "No. I just had the privilege of being there when you finally saw yourself." James came running back with a kid in his arms. "Look, Mama. She's got white paws." "She's beautiful," I said. "What will you name her?" James thought for a moment, then grinned mischievously, so much his father's son. "Aunt Isolde." Alaric and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. "That's perfect, darling," I managed between giggles. "Absolutely perfect." Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Alaric and I stood on the terrace overlooking the lake. Music drifted from inside, the orchestra warming up for the dinner party we were hosting tomorrow. All of London society would come. They always did now. We were the couple everyone wanted to know, the love story everyone whispered about. The girl jilted at the altar who'd become a duchess. The dangerous lord who'd found his match. "Do you ever wonder what happened to them?" I asked quietly, though I already knew. Edward had died 2 years ago in poverty, his title never restored. Isolde had been released from prison 6 months ago, broken and aged beyond her years. Last I'd heard, she was living in a rented room in Brighton, supported by distant cousins' charity. "No," Alaric said simply. "They're ghosts, and we're alive." He was right. We were so vividly, brilliantly alive. "Dance with me," I said suddenly. "Here? There's no music." "There's always music," I said, stepping into his arms. We danced on the terrace as the stars came out. No audience, no rules, just 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and built something extraordinary from the ashes of disaster. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too," he murmured back. "My bride, my duchess, my Clara." And somewhere in the forest, a fox with white paws howled at the moon, wild and free and absolutely perfect. Just like us. Dearest reader, if you're reading this, I'm likely long gone, but I wanted to leave you with a truth I learned on what should have been the worst day of my life. Sometimes the thing that breaks you is actually setting you free. I thought Edward leaving me at the altar was the end of my story, but it was really the beginning. The beginning of choosing myself, of discovering my own strength, of finding a love I never knew existed. My sister tried to destroy me and only made me stronger. My enemies tried to kill my husband and only brought us closer. Society tried to define me and I rewrote the definition. So if you're reading this and you're broken, know this. You get to decide what comes next. You get to choose who you become. And sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so magnificently, undeniably yourself that your enemies can only watch and envy as you thrive. I was Lady Clara Thornton, the overlooked sister, the second choice, the disappointment. I became the Duchess of Ravenhall. But more importantly, I became myself. With love and defiance, Clara.